The divorce papers were waiting on the desk before dawn ever touched the skyline of Seoul. Dr. Seraphina Vale left them there at exactly 5:47 a.m., signed with the same steady hand that had saved dozens of lives inside operating rooms that year. She took nothing except what belonged to her, slipped into a charcoal coat, and walked out of the glass penthouse she had shared with Lucien Kade without looking back once. Lucien Kade, 35, ruthless chairman of Kade Global Holdings and the hidden heir to one of Korea's most feared syndicates, found the papers hours later and signed them without hesitation. Their marriage had been a transaction. Nothing more. Or so he believed. If you want to see how far love can fall before it learns to rise again, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Besides, the divorce papers were waiting on the desk before dawn ever touched the skyline of Seoul. Dr. Seraphina Vale left them there at exactly 5:47 a.m., signed with the same steady hand that had saved dozens of lives inside operating rooms that year. She took nothing except what belonged to her, slipped into a charcoal coat, and walked out of the glass penthouse she had shared with Lucien Kade without looking back once. Below her, the city bled neon and rain across the river. Lucien Kade, 35, ruthless chairman of Kade Global Holdings and the hidden heir to one of Korea's most feared syndicates, found the papers hours later. He didn't shout, didn't chase her, didn't even blink long enough to show pain. He read every page with the detached precision of a man reviewing a financial contract. Then he signed. For 3 years, their marriage had been built on strategy, not romance. Lucien needed access to elite medical networks buried inside Seoul's hospital system. Seraphina's research credentials gave him that access. She had been the perfect solution to a syndicate problem. At least that was the lie he kept telling himself. By 7:30 that same morning, Seraphina was already inside an operating theater, elbows deep in open-heart surgery, forcing a failing heart to beat again while quietly ignoring the fact that her own had finally broken beyond repair. Inside the hospital, she was no abandoned wife. She was Dr. Vale. And for the first time in years, she felt free. What? The surgery lasted 4 hours. Seraphina didn't feel the exhaustion until she stepped out of the operating room, peeling off blood-stained gloves with fingers that finally started to shake. The adrenaline was fading. The clarity was setting in. She had walked out on Lucien Kade. Actually walked out. No dramatic confrontation, no tears, no begging him to see her the way he saw his boardrooms and balance sheets. She had simply left the signed papers on his desk beside the coffee he never drank and disappeared before the sun could expose her. Dr. Vale? Seraphina turned. A young nurse stood in the hallway holding a tablet, her expression cautious. The patient stable. Vitals are holding. Good. Seraphina's voice came out steady. Professional. Exactly the way she needed it to sound. Monitor him every 15 minutes for the next 2 hours. Page me if anything changes. Yes, doctor. The nurse disappeared down the corridor. Seraphina stood alone beneath the fluorescent lights, still wearing pale blue scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and effort. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass partition separating the surgical wing from the waiting area. 32 years old. Dark skin that still carried the warmth of her Ghanaian mother's complexion. Eyes that had spent 3 years learning how to hide disappointment behind clinical detachment. She looked exactly like the woman she had been yesterday, except now she was someone who had chosen herself. The weight of that decision sat heavy in her chest, but it didn't feel wrong. It felt overdue. Seraphina changed out of her scrubs, pulled her hair into a low bun, and walked toward the hospital cafeteria. She hadn't eaten since the night before. Her body was running on muscle memory and spite. Inside the cafeteria, she ordered black coffee and a sandwich she wouldn't finish. Then her phone buzzed. Adrian Cross. Lucien's second in command. The man who handled everything Lucien didn't want to touch himself. Seraphina stared at the name on the screen for 5 long seconds before letting the call go to voicemail. She wasn't ready. Not for Adrian's careful questions. Not for Lucien's silence. Not for the inevitable conversation where someone tried to convince her that leaving had been impulsive, emotional, irrational. She had spent 3 years being rational. 3 years being the perfect wife who never complained, never demanded, never asked for more than Lucien was willing to give. And Lucien had given her nothing except a penthouse view and a last name that carried weight in rooms she didn't care about. So she let the phone buzz until it stopped. Then she drank her coffee and tasted freedom for the first time in years. Across the city, Lucien Kade sat alone in his office on the 43rd floor of Kade Global Holdings. The divorce papers lay open on his desk. He had read them twice already. Every page, every clause, every carefully worded sentence that legally dismantled 3 years of marriage with the cold efficiency of a corporate merger dissolving. Seraphina had signed her name in black ink. Clean, steady, final. Lucien picked up a pen and signed his own name beneath hers without hesitation. There. Done. The marriage was over. He set the pen down and leaned back in his leather chair, staring at the skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Seoul stretched out beneath him like a kingdom he had spent his entire life learning how to control. But he couldn't control this, couldn't negotiate it, couldn't fix it with money or power or carefully placed threats. Seraphina was gone. And the strangest part was that Lucien didn't feel anything. No anger, no regret, no relief. Just a hollow kind of silence that settled into his chest and refused to move. Adrian entered the office without knocking. "She's not answering," Adrian said quietly. Lucien didn't look up. "I didn't ask you to call her." "You didn't have to." Adrian Cross was 42, silver-haired, and sharp enough to read Lucien better than anyone else alive. He had been Lucien's right hand since the day Lucien took control of the Syndicate 15 years ago. He knew when to push, when to stay silent, when to tell Lucien the truth even if it hurt. This was one of those moments. "She left the medication refilled," Adrian continued. "The heart pills. She restocked them before she walked out." Lucien finally looked up. "What?" "Your medication, the ones you take every night." Adrian's expression was unreadable. "She refilled the prescription 3 days ago, left them in the bathroom cabinet with a note." Lucien stood slowly, walked past Adrian, and disappeared down the hallway toward the penthouse elevator. 5 minutes later, he was standing in his bathroom staring at a pill bottle he had never thought twice about. Beside it sat a small handwritten note. "Take with food. Not negotiable." Lucien stared at the note. Then he read it again. Then he picked it up and held it like evidence. Seraphina had left him, but not before making sure he wouldn't run out of the medication keeping his damaged heart functional. For the first time that morning, something cracked inside Lucien's chest. Not grief, not pain, something worse. Realization. Seraphina didn't go home. She couldn't. The apartment she had rented 2 weeks ago, small, unfurnished, tucked into a neighborhood far from the glass towers Lucien owned, felt too empty, too quiet, too much like admitting she was starting over from nothing. So instead she went back to work, another surgery, another emergency case that needed her hands more than her emotions. This one was a 60-year-old man with a torn aorta, high risk, low survival rate. The kind of case that required absolute focus and left no room for anything else. Seraphina scrubbed in, stepped into the operating theater, and let the work erase everything. For 6 hours, there was no Lucien, no divorce, no 3 years of invisible sacrifices that had slowly hollowed her out from the inside. Just the rhythm of her hands, the steady beep of monitors, the stubborn refusal to let another heart stop beating. By the time she finished, it was almost midnight. The patient was stable. Seraphina was not. She sat alone in the surgeon's lounge, still wearing scrubs, staring at her phone. 14 missed calls, 3 from Adrian, 11 from a number she didn't recognize. No calls from Lucien. Of course not. Lucien didn't chase, didn't beg, didn't fight for things he believed were already his. And that was the problem. Seraphina had never been his. She had been his solution, his access point, his carefully placed asset inside the medical world he needed to control. The marriage had been a transaction from the beginning, arranged by people more powerful than either of them. Seraphina's research credentials opened doors Lucien couldn't break down with money alone. His name gave her protection she didn't realize she needed until it was too late to refuse. They had signed the papers, moved into the penthouse, played the role of husband and wife in public while living like strangers in private. And somewhere along the way, Seraphina had made the fatal mistake of falling in love with a man who didn't believe in love at all. She had tried to tell herself it didn't matter. tried to convince herself that partnership was enough, that respect was enough, that maybe, eventually, Lucien would notice her the way he noticed threats to his empire. But 3 years later, nothing had changed. Lucien still looked through her like she was furniture, still forgot she existed unless he needed something, still treated their marriage like a business arrangement that required maintenance but never affection. And Seraphina had finally run out of patience. She stood, grabbed her coat, and walked out of the hospital into the cold Seoul night. The rain had stopped. The streets were slick and empty. Seraphina pulled her coat tighter and started walking with no destination in mind. Just movement, just distance, just anything that felt like forward. Halfway down the block, her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Dr. Vale?" The voice on the other end was smooth, controlled, and entirely too calm. "Seraphina." Lucien. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected him to call, hadn't expected him to care enough to try. "I signed the papers," he said quietly. Of course he did. Seraphina closed her eyes and kept walking. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then Lucien spoke again, and this time his voice carried something she had never heard before. Uncertainty. "Why did you refill my medication?" Seraphina stopped walking. The question landed like a punch she hadn't seen coming. "Because you need it," she said simply. "You walked out." "I did." "But you made sure I wouldn't run out of pills first." "Yes." Another silence, longer this time, heavier. "Why?" Lucien asked again. Seraphina exhaled slowly, staring at the wet pavement beneath her feet. "Because love doesn't stop just because you leave, Lucien. It just stops being enough." She hung up before he could respond. Then she turned off her phone and kept walking into the rain-soaked Seoul night, alone, but finally, devastatingly free. Lucien stood in the center of his penthouse, holding a phone that had gone silent. Adrian watched from the doorway, saying nothing. Lucien didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the phone like it had delivered a verdict he didn't know how to appeal. "She's right," Adrian said quietly. Lucien looked up. "About what?" "All of it." Adrian stepped into the room, hands in his pockets, expression carefully neutral. "You want the truth?" Lucien said nothing. Adrian took that as permission. "You didn't just ignore her, Lucien. You erased her, treated her like part of the furniture. She kept your life running, kept your secrets safe, kept you alive when you didn't even realize you were dying. And you never once looked at her long enough to say thank you." Lucien's jaw tightened. "I gave her everything." "You gave her nothing that mattered." The words hit harder than Lucien expected. He turned away, staring out at the city lights bleeding across the skyline. "She knew what this marriage was," Lucien said quietly. "It was never supposed to be about love." "And yet she loved you anyway," Adrian replied. "That's the part you still don't understand." Lucien didn't respond. Because Adrian was right. He didn't understand. Didn't understand why Seraphina had stayed so long. Didn't understand why she had protected him, cared for him, quietly built an entire world around him without ever asking for anything in return. Didn't understand why she had finally walked away. Or worse, didn't understand why her leaving felt like losing something he hadn't realized he needed. "What do you want me to do?" Lucien asked, his voice low. Adrian studied him for a long moment. "I don't think you get to do anything," Adrian said finally. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. She didn't leave because she stopped caring. She left because caring was killing her." Lucien turned slowly. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Let her go." The simplicity of the answer made it worse. Lucien had spent his entire life taking what he wanted, destroying what threatened him, and controlling everything in between. But he couldn't control this. Couldn't take Seraphina back. Couldn't destroy the part of her that had finally chosen herself. All he could do was stand in the silence she left behind and feel the weight of everything he had failed to notice until it was gone. Adrian left without another word. Lucien stood alone in the penthouse, staring at the note Seraphina had left beside his medication. "Take with food. Not negotiable." He read it again and again. And for the first time in 15 years, Lucien Kade felt something he had spent his entire life avoiding. Regret. 3 days passed. Seraphina worked, slept in her unfurnished apartment, avoided every phone call that wasn't work-related, rebuilt herself one quiet hour at a time. On the 4th day, she received a package. No return address. Just a plain box sitting outside her apartment door. Seraphina carried it inside, set it on the counter, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single item, a jar of Ghanaian pepper sauce. The same brand she used to keep beside the stove in the penthouse. The same one Lucien claimed was too spicy but secretly loved. The same one she had taken with her when she left. Except this wasn't hers. This was new, unopened, and tucked beneath the jar was a handwritten note. "I didn't know you were the one making my coffee blend until you were gone." Seraphina stared at the note. Then she read it again. Then she sat down on the floor of her empty apartment and cried for the first time since leaving. Not because Lucien had sent her pepper sauce, not because he had finally noticed, but because noticing wasn't enough. It had never been enough, and now it was too late. Across the city, Lucien sat in his office staring at a file Adrian had placed on his desk an hour ago. The file contained everything Seraphina had done in the last 3 years. Everything she had fixed, everything she had hidden, everything she had sacrificed without ever asking for credit. The billion-dollar contract disaster she had quietly resolved by calling in a favor with the medical director Lucien didn't even know she was connected to. The night Lucien had collapsed in the penthouse from a cardiac episode, an episode he didn't remember because Seraphina had treated him herself, alone, in the middle of the night, and never told him how close he had come to dying. The Syndicate leaks she had traced back to someone Lucien trusted, the threats she had deflected, the enemies she had identified, all of it invisible, all of it done in silence, all of it motivated by a love Lucien had been too blind to recognize. He read every page twice. Then he closed the file and sat in the silence of his office, feeling the full weight of what he had lost. Not a wife, not a transaction, not a solution to a Syndicate problem. He had lost the only person who had ever loved him without conditions, and he had signed the papers without even pausing to ask why she left. Adrian entered the office quietly. "There's something else," Adrian said. Lucien looked up. Adrian hesitated. Then he placed a second file on the desk. "She's been diagnosed." Lucien's blood went cold. "With what?" "Stage 1 cardiac arrhythmia, the same condition you have." The room tilted. Lucien stared at the file like it was written in a language he didn't understand. "When?" "6 months ago." "And she didn't tell me." "No." "Why?" Adrian's expression was calm, but his voice carried an edge Lucien had never heard before. "Because she didn't want you to stay out of guilt." The words detonated inside Lucien's chest. Seraphina had been sick for 6 months, managing the same failing heart condition she had been secretly treating in him for 3 years, and she had hidden it because she loved him enough to let him go without obligation. Lucien stood slowly, his hands shaking for the first time in 15 years. "Where is she?" "Seoul General, night shift." Lucien grabbed his coat. Adrian stepped in front of him. "Don't do this unless you mean it," Adrian said quietly. "Don't go to her because you feel guilty. Don't go because you owe her. She spent 3 years being the woman you needed. If you go now, you better be the man she deserves." Lucien met Adrian's eyes. "I don't know if I am." "Then figure it out before you walk through that door." Lucien stood frozen. Then he turned and walked out of the office, his heart pounding against his ribs like something trying to break free. Seraphina finished her shift at 2 a.m. She changed out of her scrubs, pulled on her coat, and walked through the empty hospital corridors toward the exit. The rain had started again, cold, relentless, the kind of rain that soaked through everything. She stepped outside and stopped. Lucien Kade stood in the rain 20 feet away. No umbrella, no security detail, no empire surrounding him, just a man in a gray coat, soaked through, staring at her like she was the only thing left in the world worth looking at. Seraphina's breath caught. "What are you doing here?" Lucien didn't move. "I know about your heart." The sentence landed between them like a grenade. Seraphina's chest tightened. "Adrian told you." "Yes." "And you came here to, what? Make sure I'm okay? Offer to pay for treatment? Add me to your list of problems that need managing? No. Lucien stepped forward. Seraphina stepped back. Don't, she whispered. Don't do this, Lucien. Don't show up now and pretend you care just because you found out I'm sick. I'm not pretending. Then what are you doing? Lucien stopped. The rain poured down between them. I'm trying to understand, he said quietly, how I spent 3 years standing next to you and never saw you at all. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. You saw me, Lucien. You just didn't think I mattered. The words cut deeper than anything Lucien had ever felt. He stood there, rain dripping from his hair, his coat, his hands, staring at the woman he had destroyed without even trying. I read the file, he said. Everything you did, everything you fixed, everything you carried alone. And I don't know how to fix this. Seraphina laughed, but it came out broken. You can't, Lucien. That's the point. Some things don't get fixed. They just end. She turned to walk away. Lucien's voice stopped her. I signed the divorce papers because I thought that's what you wanted. Seraphina looked back. It was. Was. She didn't answer. Lucien took another step forward. If I had known. You should have known, Seraphina cut him off, her voice shaking. You should have noticed. You should have cared enough to ask why I was always awake at 3 a.m. You should have wondered why I kept your medication stocked, why I knew your schedule better than you did, why I stayed when you gave me every reason to leave. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you only started paying attention after I walked out. And that's not love, Lucien. That's just fear of losing control. The accusation hit like a blade. Because she was right. Lucien had spent 3 years controlling everything except the one thing that mattered. Her. And now she was standing in front of him, soaked through, exhausted, finally free. And he had no idea how to ask her to stay without proving her point. I don't want to control you, Lucien said quietly. Then what do you want? The question hung between them. Lucien didn't have an answer, not one that would matter, not one that would undo 3 years of neglect. So instead he told her the only truth he had left. I want to be someone you don't regret loving. Seraphina's breath hitched. Tears spilled down her face, mixing with the rain. You're 3 years too late. Then she turned and walked away into the rain-soaked Seoul night, leaving Lucien standing alone beneath the hospital lights, with nothing left except the devastating realization that he had finally learned to see her. Right after she stopped waiting to be seen, Lucien didn't go home. He stood in the rain for 20 minutes after Seraphina disappeared, soaked through to the bone, staring at the empty space where she had been standing. 3 years too late. The words circled his head like vultures. By the time he finally moved, his hands were numb, and his chest felt like something had been carved out of it with a dull knife. Adrian was waiting in the car at the curb, engine running, wipers cutting through the downpour. Lucien climbed into the back seat without speaking. Adrian handed him a towel. Lucien ignored it. She's right, Lucien said quietly. Adrian said nothing. I didn't see her, not once, not in 3 years. No, Adrian agreed. You didn't. Lucien turned to look at him. You could have told me. Would you have listened? The question sat between them like an accusation. Lucien didn't answer because they both already knew. No, he wouldn't have. 3 years ago, Lucien Kade had been a man who measured everything in terms of control, leverage, and utility. Marriage was a contract. Love was a weakness. Seraphina had been a solution to a problem he couldn't solve with money or threats. And somewhere along the way, she had become invisible. Not because she wasn't there, but because Lucien had stopped looking. Drive, Lucien said. Adrian pulled away from the curb. They didn't go back to the penthouse. Instead, Adrian drove them to the one place Lucien never went unless absolutely necessary. The Kade family estate, 20 acres of old money and older ghosts buried in the hills outside Seoul where the Syndicate had built its empire decades before Lucien was born. His mother still lived there, alone, waiting. Lucien hadn't visited in 8 months. The gates opened automatically as the car approached. Adrian pulled up to the main house, a sprawling traditional structure that looked like it belonged in a different century. Lucien stepped out into the rain. The front door opened before he reached it. His mother stood in the doorway, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's cars. Eleanor Kade was 63 years old and still the most dangerous woman Lucien had ever met. She looked him up and down, taking in his soaked coat, his wet hair, the exhaustion carved into his face. "You look terrible," she said. "Hello, Mother." Eleanor stepped aside to let him in. The interior of the house was exactly as Lucien remembered. Dark wood, expensive art, the kind of silence that felt heavy enough to crush you. Eleanor led him into the sitting room, poured herself a glass of whiskey, and didn't offer him one. "Seraphina left you," she said. It wasn't a question. Lucien sat down in the chair across from her. 3 days ago. "And you signed the papers?" "Yes." Eleanor sipped her whiskey, studying him like a specimen under glass. "Good," she said finally. Lucien looked up sharply. "What?" "I said good. She should have left you 2 years ago." The bluntness of it landed like a slap. Lucien's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." Eleanor laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. "Don't I? I watched you ignore that woman for 3 years, Lucien. Watched her show up to family dinners and charity galas and syndicate meetings, playing the role of your devoted wife while you treated her like hired help. She smiled through all of it, never complained, never made a scene, and you never once looked at her long enough to notice she was dying inside." "I didn't—" "You did," Eleanor cut him off. "You did exactly what your father did to me. You took a woman who loved you and turned her into a ghost." The comparison hit harder than Lucien expected. He stood abruptly. "I'm nothing like him." "No?" Eleanor's voice was sharp. "Your father married me because I gave him legitimacy, social standing, access to circles he couldn't buy his way into. And once he had what he needed, I became invisible. Just like Seraphina." Lucien turned away, staring at the rain-streaked windows. "She knew what the marriage was," he said quietly. "It was never supposed to be about love." "And yet she loved you anyway," Eleanor replied. "That's the tragedy, Lucien. She gave you something you didn't earn and didn't deserve, and you were too blind to see it until she took it back." Lucien said nothing. Eleanor stood, walked over to him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her voice softened. "You want to know why your father and I stayed married for 40 years even though we hated each other?" Lucien looked at her. "Because neither of us had the courage to leave," Eleanor said. "We were too proud, too afraid of what people would say, too invested in the performance, and we spent 4 decades destroying each other in silence." She paused. "Seraphina had the courage we didn't. She chose herself. And you should let her go." "I don't want to." "I know, but what you want stopped mattering the moment you signed those papers." Eleanor walked back to her chair, picked up her whiskey, and looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Go home, Lucien. Grieve the marriage you never had, and then move on." Lucien left the estate 20 minutes later with his mother's words ringing in his ears. But he didn't go home. He went to the one place he always went when everything else failed: the Syndicate. The Kade Syndicate operated out of a nondescript building in Gangnam that looked like a high-end law firm from the outside. Inside, it was something else entirely. Lucien walked through the marble lobby, past security, who nodded without speaking, and took the private elevator down 3 floors to the sublevels where the real work happened. The doors opened into a hallway lined with reinforced steel. At the end of the hall sat a conference room where the inner circle met. Lucien pushed open the door. 6 people looked up. Adrian was already there, seated at the far end of the table. Beside him sat Marcus Vey, the Syndicate's head of operations, cold, efficient, loyal to a fault. Across from Marcus sat Celeste Laurent. Lucien stopped in the doorway. Celeste smiled. "Hello, Lucien." Celeste Laurent was 34, blonde, beautiful in the way that sharp objects are beautiful. She had been Lucien's lover years ago, before the marriage, before Seraphina, back when Lucien still believed intimacy was just another form of leverage. She was also the reason the marriage had happened in the first place. Celeste had orchestrated the entire arrangement. She had connections inside the medical community that the Syndicate needed. She had identified Seraphina as the perfect candidate. She had brokered the deal, and she had done it all because she believed Lucien would never actually care about the woman he married. She had been right, until now. Lucien walked into the room and sat down at the head of the table. Why are you here? He asked. Celeste's smile widened. I heard about the divorce. Thought I'd check in. You're not part of this operation anymore. No, but I'm still invested in your well-being. The statement was laced with something Lucien didn't like. Adrian spoke before Lucien could respond. We have a problem, Adrian said. Lucien turned. What kind of problem? Marcus slid a folder across the table. Lucien opened it. Inside were financial records, transfer logs, communications between Syndicate accounts and external entities. Someone had been leaking information. Slowly, carefully, for months. Lucien's eyes scanned the documents, his mind already calculating the damage. How bad? He asked. Bad enough that 3 of our offshore accounts have been flagged, Marcus said. We're looking at a full audit if we don't move fast. Who? We don't know yet. Lucien closed the folder and looked up. Find out. Marcus nodded. Celeste leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. You know, she said casually, this kind of thing doesn't happen unless someone on the inside is talking. Lucien's gaze shifted to her. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe you should look closer to home. The implication hung in the air. Adrian's expression didn't change, but Lucien saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. If you have something to say, Celeste, say it, Adrian said quietly. Celeste shrugged. I'm just pointing out that the leaks started around the same time Seraphina got access to your financial files. The room went silent. Lucien stared at Celeste. You think Seraphina is the leak? I think it's worth investigating. No. The word came out flat. Final. Celeste raised an eyebrow. No? Seraphina had nothing to do with this. You're sure about that? Yes. Celeste leaned back in her chair, studying him with something that looked like amusement. Interesting, she said. 3 days ago you signed divorce papers without blinking. Now you're defending her like she's still your wife. Lucien's hands curled into fists beneath the table. This meeting is over, he said. Lucien, I said it's over. Celeste stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. Fine. But when you find out I'm right, don't say I didn't warn you. She walked out of the room, heels clicking against the floor. The door closed behind her. Marcus looked at Lucien. You want us to investigate her anyway? No? Lucien, I said no. Adrian spoke quietly from the other end of the table. She's trying to poison you against Seraphina. I know. Then why did you let her stay in the room? Because I wanted to see how far she'd push it. Adrian studied him for a long moment. And? She's lying, Lucien said. Seraphina's not the leak. Celeste is. Marcus frowned. What makes you say that? Because Celeste has been trying to destroy Seraphina since the day we got married. And now that Seraphina's gone, she thinks she has an opening. Adrian nodded slowly. What do you want us to do? Find the proof. Trace every transaction back to the source. And when you find Celeste's fingerprints on it, bring me everything. Marcus stood. Consider it done. He left the room. Adrian stayed. Lucien sat in silence, staring at the folder on the table. You're protecting her, Adrian said. Seraphina didn't do this. I know, but that's not what I mean. Lucien looked up. Adrian's expression was calm, but his voice carried an edge. You're protecting her because you finally realized what she was to you, and now you're terrified that someone's going to take that realization away before you figure out how to fix it. Lucien didn't respond, because Adrian was right. Again. Momek. Seraphina spent the next 4 days pretending the rain-soaked confrontation with Lucien hadn't happened. She worked double shifts, slept in stolen hours between surgeries, ignored every phone call from numbers she didn't recognize. On the 5th day, she received a visitor. Dr. Elias Arden walked into her office at the end of her shift carrying 2 cups of coffee and a cautious smile. Elias was 41, silver-haired, calm in the way people who had survived too much tended to be. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the best in Seoul, and for the last 6 months he had been quietly, patiently interested in Seraphina in a way that felt safe. Not overwhelming, not demanding, just present. You look exhausted, Elias said, setting one of the coffee cups on her desk. Seraphina smiled faintly. That's because I am. When's the last time you ate something that wasn't vending machine food? Yesterday, maybe. Elias sat down across from her. Come to dinner with me. Seraphina looked up. Elias? Not a date. Just food. Somewhere quiet. No hospitals. No emergencies. Just two colleagues who both forgot what it's like to be human. Seraphina hesitated. Then she nodded. Okay. Parti. They went to a small restaurant tucked into a side street in Itaewon. Quiet. Warm. The kind of place that didn't ask questions and didn't demand performances. Seraphina ordered soup. Elias ordered the same. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Elias spoke. I heard about the divorce. Seraphina's hand paused halfway to her mouth. She set the spoon down carefully. News travels fast. It does when the person involved is married to Lucien Kade. Seraphina said nothing. Elias leaned back in his chair, studying her. Are you okay? I don't know yet. Fair answer. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Elias asked the question Seraphina had been avoiding. Do you regret it? Seraphina looked up. Leaving? Yes. She thought about it, really thought about it. Then she shook her head. No. I regret staying as long as I did. Elias nodded. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Realizing you wasted years on something that was never going to change. Seraphina's throat tightened. Yeah, she whispered. It is. Elias reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. Not romantic, just human. You deserve someone who sees you, he said quietly. Not someone who only notices you after you're gone. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. She pulled her hand back gently. I know, she said. That's why I left. Elias smiled. Good. They finished their meal in silence, and for the first time in days, Seraphina felt like she could breathe. Across the city, Lucien sat in his office staring at a photograph. It was a candid shot taken at a charity gala 2 years ago. Seraphina stood beside him in a midnight blue gown, smiling at someone off camera. Lucien was looking at his phone. He didn't remember the moment, didn't remember what he had been looking at, didn't remember anything about that night except the speech he had given and the investors he had cornered afterward. But Seraphina had been there, right beside him, smiling, and he hadn't even noticed. Lucien set the photograph down and picked up the file Marcus had delivered an hour ago. Inside were financial records traced back to a single offshore account. The account belonged to Celeste Laurent. She had been siphoning funds for 8 months, small amounts at first, then larger. Always careful, always covered, but not careful enough. Lucien closed the file and stood. Adrian appeared in the doorway. She's meeting someone tonight, Adrian said. At the Imperial Hotel, we don't know who yet. Find out. Already working on it. Lucien grabbed his coat. Where are you going? Adrian asked. To end this. The Imperial Hotel sat in the heart of Gangnam, all glass and marble and money. Lucien walked through the lobby like he owned it. Because technically, he did. The Kade family had controlling interest in the building. He took the elevator to the penthouse level, walked down the hall, and stopped in front of Suite 47. He didn't knock. He used the master key the hotel manager had given him 20 minutes ago. The door opened. Inside, Celeste sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, looking up in surprise. Lucien. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. We need to talk. Celeste stood slowly, setting her phone down. About what? Lucien pulled the file from his coat and tossed it onto the bed. Celeste glanced at it. Her expression didn't change. You've been stealing from the Syndicate, Lucien said quietly. That's a strong word. It's the correct word. Celeste crossed her arms. I prefer to think of it as collecting what I'm owed. You're not owed anything. No? Celeste's voice sharpened. I brokered your marriage. I gave you access to the medical networks you needed. I handed you Seraphina on a silver platter, and you gave me nothing in return. I gave you a position in the operation, which you took away the moment you decided I wasn't useful anymore. Lucien stepped closer. You orchestrated the marriage because you thought I'd never care about her. You thought I'd use her and discard her, and then you'd still have a place in my life. But you were wrong. Celeste laughed. It was sharp, Bitter. Was I? Because from where I'm standing, you did exactly what I expected. You ignored her for 3 years, treated her like furniture, and the moment she walked out, you finally realized what you lost. You're right, Lucien said quietly. Celeste blinked. What? You're right. I ignored her. I failed her. I destroyed the only real thing I ever had. Lucien's voice didn't waver. But that doesn't change the fact that you've been stealing from me. And it doesn't change what happens next. Celeste's smile faded. What happens next? Lucien pulled out his phone and made a call. 2 security personnel entered the suite 30 seconds later. Escort Miss Laurent out of the building, Lucien said. She's no longer welcome here. Celeste stared at him. You're serious? Yes. Lucius, you're done, Celeste. Done with the Syndicate. Done with my life. Done pretending you ever cared about anything except yourself. Celeste's expression twisted into something ugly. You're going to regret this. Maybe, but I'll regret it a lot less than I regret not seeing Seraphina until it was too late. The security personnel stepped forward. Celeste grabbed her coat and walked toward the door. She stopped in front of Lucien. She's never coming back to you, Celeste said quietly. You know that, right? You destroyed her, and no amount of guilt or late-night gestures is going to fix that. Lucien met her eyes. I know. Celeste left. The door closed behind her. Lucien stood alone in the suite, staring at the file on the bed. He had just severed the last connection to the woman who had orchestrated his marriage, the woman who had given him Seraphina, and all he felt was empty. Three days later, Seraphina received an envelope. No return address, just her name written in careful handwriting she didn't recognize. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a man in his 60s, silver-haired, standing outside a small house in the countryside. Seraphina didn't recognize him, but something about his eyes looked familiar. She turned the photograph over. On the back, someone had written a single sentence. Your husband's father, alive, hidden for 15 years. Seraphina's breath stopped. She read the sentence again. Then again. Then she sat down slowly, staring at the photograph like it was a bomb that had just detonated in her hands. Lucien's father, alive. The man Lucien believed had died when he was 10 years old. The man whose death had shaped everything Lucien became, alive. Seraphina's mind raced. Who sent this? Why now? And more importantly, did Lucien know? She grabbed her phone, hesitated, then dialed. Lucien answered on the second ring. Seraphina. His voice sounded surprised, hopeful. Seraphina's chest tightened. We need to talk, she said quietly. About what? Your father. Silence. Then Lucien's voice came back, low and dangerous. What about him? He's alive, Lucien. The line went dead silent. Seraphina could hear Lucien breathing. What did you just say? I have a photograph. Someone sent it to me. Your father is alive, and someone's been hiding him for 15 years. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Lucien's voice came back, barely above a whisper. Where are you? My apartment. Stay there. I'm coming. The line went dead. Seraphina sat alone in her apartment, holding the photograph, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had just reopened a wound Lucien had spent 15 years trying to close, and she had no idea what was going to happen next. Why? Lucien arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't knock. Seraphina heard the lock click and turned to see him standing in her doorway, soaked from the rain again, his expression carved from stone. She held up the photograph. Lucien crossed the room in 3 strides and took it from her hands. He stared at it. His face didn't move. Didn't change. But Seraphina saw his hand start to shake. Where did you get this? His voice was barely controlled. Someone sent it. No return address. Just this. Lucien turned the photograph over. Read the sentence on the back. Then he crumpled it in his fist. Who? He demanded. I don't know. Who sent this to you, Seraphina? I don't know. Lucien turned away, pacing like a caged animal. He's dead. He's been dead for 15 years. I watched them bury him. Lucien, This is a lie. Someone's trying to manipulate us. What if it's not? Lucien stopped, turned, stared at her. What if it's not a lie? Seraphina said quietly. What if your father's been alive this whole time? What if someone's been hiding him from you? Lucien's jaw clenched. Why would someone do that? I don't know, but I think we need to find out. Lucien looked down at the crumpled photograph in his hand, then back at Seraphina. Why did they send this to you? He asked. Why not me? Seraphina's throat tightened. Maybe because they knew I'd tell you. Maybe because they knew you wouldn't believe it unless it came from someone you trusted. I don't trust anyone. You trusted me once. The words hung between them. Lucien stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he sat down slowly on the edge of her couch, still holding the photograph. If this is real, he said quietly, if my father's alive. He didn't finish the sentence. Seraphina sat down beside him. Not close, but present. Then we find him, she said. Lucien looked at her. Why would you help me? Seraphina didn't have a good answer. She should have walked away. Should have let Lucien deal with this alone. Should have protected herself the way she had protected herself by leaving in the first place. But she couldn't. Because even after everything, even after 3 years of being invisible, even after walking out and choosing herself, she still loved him, and that terrified her more than anything else. Because you deserve to know the truth, she said finally. Lucien's eyes searched hers. Even if the truth destroys me? Even then. They sat in silence. Outside, the rain poured down. And for the first time in weeks, Lucien and Seraphina were in the same room, not as husband and wife, not as strangers, but as two people standing at the edge of something that could either save them or bury them both. The address led them to a village 2 hours outside Seoul. Lucien drove in silence, hands tight on the wheel, jaw set like concrete. Seraphina sat in the passenger seat with the photograph pressed between her fingers, watching the city lights fade into darkness as they climbed into the mountains. Adrian had traced the envelope's origin to a post office in Yangpyeong. No cameras, no witnesses, just a prepaid postage stamp and a return address that turned out to be an abandoned warehouse. Someone wanted them to find this. Someone wanted Lucien to know. The question was why. You don't have to come with me, Lucien said, breaking the silence. Seraphina didn't look at him. I know. Then why are you here? She didn't have an answer that made sense. 3 weeks ago, she had walked out on this man, signed divorce papers, chosen herself over a marriage that had been slowly killing her. And now she was sitting beside him, driving into the unknown, chasing ghosts that might destroy him completely. Because you shouldn't do this alone, she said finally. Lucien's hands tightened on the wheel. I've done everything alone. I know, that's the problem. He didn't respond. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The house sat at the end of a dirt road, half hidden by trees, small and unremarkable in the way places designed to be forgotten always are. Lucien parked 50 yards away and killed the engine. They sat in the dark, staring at the single light burning in the front window. What if it's not him? Seraphina asked quietly. Then someone's about to have a very bad night. Lucien opened the door and stepped out. Seraphina followed. The air was cold. Sharp. The kind of cold that cut through fabric and settled into bones. They walked toward the house without speaking. Lucien's hand moved to the inside of his coat where Seraphina knew he kept a weapon. She had never seen him use it, had never asked if he carried it everywhere. But tonight, she was glad it was there. Lucien knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Then the door opened. The man standing in the doorway was 63 years old, silver-haired, with eyes that looked exactly like Lucien's. Seraphina's breath caught. Lucien stood frozen. The man stared at them, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was rough, like something that hadn't been used properly in years. Lucien. The single word shattered something. Lucien's face didn't move, but Seraphina saw his chest stop rising. You're dead, Lucien said flatly. The man's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. No, just buried. Lucien stepped forward. Seraphina moved with him, her hand instinctively reaching for his arm, but he pulled away. Who are you? Lucien demanded. You know who I am. No, My father died 15 years ago. I watched them lower his coffin into the ground. The man stepped back, opening the door wider. Come inside, both of you. Lucien hesitated. Then he walked through the door. Seraphina followed, her heart pounding. The interior of this house was sparse. A single couch, a small table, walls that held nothing except shadows. The man gestured toward the couch. Neither Lucien nor Seraphina sat. Start talking, Lucien said. The man poured himself a drink from a bottle on the counter. Whiskey, cheap, the kind that burned going down. He didn't offer them any. My name is Daniel Kade, the man said, and I am your father. Prove it. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. He handed it to Lucien. Lucien took it slowly. It showed a younger version of Daniel holding a child. The child was maybe 4 years old, dark-haired, serious-faced. Lucien. Seraphina watched Lucien's expression fracture. This doesn't prove anything, Lucien said, but his voice had lost its edge. Daniel sat down heavily in the chair across from them. You had a scar on your left shoulder from falling off a swing when you were 6. Your mother told everyone it was a bicycle accident because she didn't want people thinking she wasn't watching you. You were terrified of thunderstorms until you were 9. You used to hide in your closet and count to 100 over and over until the storm passed. Lucien's hands started shaking. Daniel kept talking. Your favorite food was your mother's japchae. You hated carrots. You wanted to be an architect when you grew up because you liked the idea of building things that lasted forever. Stop, Lucien whispered. Daniel stopped. The silence pressed down like a weight. Seraphina watched Lucien struggle to breathe, watched him fight to keep his face blank, watched him lose. Why? Lucien finally asked. Why did you let me think you were dead? Daniel's expression didn't change. Because I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. Not when the people you love are being used as leverage. Lucien's jaw clenched. What are you talking about? Daniel stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. 15 years ago, I tried to leave the Syndicate. I was tired of the violence, tired of watching my family get pulled deeper into something I couldn't control. So I made a deal with a rival organization. I would give them information in exchange for protection, for a way out. Lucien's face went cold. You betrayed the Syndicate. Yes. You betrayed my mother. Yes. You betrayed me. Daniel turned slowly. Yes. Lucien moved so fast Seraphina almost didn't see it. 1 second he was standing beside her. The next he had Daniel pinned against the wall, forearm pressed against his throat. You let me grow up thinking you were dead, Lucien said, his voice shaking with rage. You let me carry that. You let my mother destroy herself trying to hold everything together. You let me become the very thing you were trying to escape. Daniel didn't fight back. He just looked at Lucien with something that might have been regret. I know. You know? Lucien's voice rose. That's all you have to say? You know? What do you want me to say, Lucien? That I'm sorry? I am. That I wish I could go back and do it differently? I do. But I can't. The deal I made went bad. The people I trusted sold me out. And the only way to keep you and your mother alive was to disappear. Lucien shoved him harder against the wall. Who made you disappear? Daniel hesitated. Lucien's hand moved to the weapon inside his coat. Who? Celeste Laurent. The name hit like a gunshot. Lucien stepped back slowly, his face draining of color. Seraphina's stomach dropped. What did you just say? Lucien asked. Daniel straightened, rubbing his throat. Celeste Laurent. She was the one who brokered the deal. She was the one who arranged my fake death. She was the one who's been keeping me hidden all these years. Lucien stared at him. Why? Because she wanted control. Over you. Over the Syndicate. Over everything your mother built after I disappeared. She knew that if you ever found out I was alive, you'd tear apart everything to find me. So she kept me locked away. A secret she could use whenever she needed leverage. Seraphina's mind raced. Celeste had orchestrated Lucien's marriage to Seraphina. Celeste had stolen from the Syndicate. And now, Celeste had been hiding Lucien's father for 15 years. She's been controlling you your entire life, Seraphina said quietly. Lucien turned to look at her. His expression was something Seraphina had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered, devastation. I need to make a call, he said. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Adrian answered immediately. Find Celeste Laurent, Lucien said, his voice dead calm. Find her now. And when you do, bring her to the estate. I don't care what you have to do. Just bring her. He hung up. Then he turned back to Daniel. You're coming with us. Daniel shook his head. I can't. You don't have a choice. If I leave this house, Celeste will know. She has people watching, always watching. Lucien stepped forward. I don't care. You're my father. You don't get to hide anymore. Daniel's expression softened. You're right, he said quietly. I don't. Thud. They drove back to Seoul in silence. Daniel sat in the back seat, staring out the window like a man seeing the world for the first time in years. Lucien didn't look at him, didn't speak, just drove with both hands locked on the wheel, his face carved from stone. Seraphina watched him from the passenger seat, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Grief, anger, fear. All of it tangled together until she couldn't tell where one emotion ended and another began. When they reached the Kade estate, Eleanor was waiting. She stood in the doorway, backlit by the interior lights, her expression unreadable. Lucien got out of the car. Daniel followed. Eleanor looked at him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Eleanor walked down the steps, stopped 3 feet in front of Daniel, and slapped him across the face. The sound echoed across the courtyard. Daniel didn't flinch. You bastard, Eleanor said quietly. I know. You let me bury an empty coffin. I know. You let me raise our son alone. I know. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. I should kill you myself. You should. Eleanor stared at him for another long moment. Then she turned and walked back into the house without another word. Lucien watched her go. Then he looked at Seraphina. You should leave, he said. Lucien, I mean it. This is going to get ugly, and you don't need to be here for it. Seraphina shook her head. I'm not leaving. Why? Because you need someone who isn't family, someone who can see this clearly. Lucien's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Adrian arrived an hour later. He walked into the estate's main sitting room where Lucien, Seraphina, Eleanor, and Daniel were waiting. We have a problem, Adrian said. What kind of problem? Lucien asked. Celeste is gone. The room went silent. What do you mean, gone? Lucien's voice was ice. I mean, she cleared out. Her apartment is empty. Her accounts are closed. Her phone is disconnected. She disappeared. Lucien stood slowly. When? Best guess? Right after you kicked her out of the hotel. She knew you were coming for her. Lucien's hands curled into fists. Find her. I'm trying, but she's good, Lucien. She's been planning this for a long time. Seraphina spoke from her seat by the window. She orchestrated everything. Everyone turned to look at her. Seraphina stood, her mind working through the pieces. She hid Daniel to control Lucien. She arranged our marriage to give Lucien access to medical networks. She stole from the Syndicate to fund her exit, and now she's disappeared because she knows Lucien finally figured it out. Eleanor's voice cut through the room like a blade. She wanted the Syndicate. Seraphina looked at her. Eleanor's expression was cold, calculating. Celeste has been positioning herself for years, waiting for the right moment to take control, and she used all of us to do it. Lucien's voice was barely controlled. How do we find her? Adrian pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. She made one mistake. 3 days ago, she transferred a large sum of money to an account in Singapore. The account is under a shell company, but I traced it back to a property listing. He pulled up an image. A luxury apartment overlooking Marina Bay. She's in Singapore? Lucien asked. Either that or she wants us to think she is. Lucien stared at the image. Then he looked at Adrian. Book a flight. Lucien. I said book a flight. Adrian hesitated. Then he nodded. Zat. 6 hours later, Lucien and Seraphina were on a private jet to Singapore. Seraphina hadn't planned to come. But when Lucien had looked at her in the estate and said, "I need you," she hadn't been able to say no. Now they sat across from each other in the cabin, the hum of the engines filling the silence between them. "You don't have to do this," Lucien said. Seraphina looked up from the window. "You already said that." "I'm saying it again. And I'm ignoring it again." Lucien's expression softened slightly. "Why are you really here, Seraphina?" She didn't answer right away. Because the truth was complicated. The truth was that she had walked out on him, had chosen herself, had signed papers that legally ended their marriage. And yet here she was, flying across international borders to help him hunt down the woman who had orchestrated their entire relationship. "Because you were right," she said finally. "About what? You asked me once why I refilled your medication before I left, and I told you it was because love doesn't stop just because you leave." Lucien's eyes locked on hers. "I still love you, Lucien. I hate that I do. I hate that even after everything, even after 3 years of being invisible, I can't just turn it off. But I can't. And I can't watch you walk into this alone." Lucien's throat worked. "I don't deserve that." "I know. I don't deserve you. I know that too." They sat in silence. Then Lucien stood and crossed the cabin. He sat down beside her, not touching, just close. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who does." Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I'm not." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw something she had never seen before. Vulnerability, raw, unguarded, real. "Okay," she whispered. They landed in Singapore just after dawn. Adrian had arranged for a car to meet them at the airport. The driver took them directly to the Marina Bay address. The building was sleek, modern, the kind of place where security asked questions and didn't accept vague answers. Lucien walked up to the front desk. "I'm here to see Celeste Laurent. Penthouse suite." The security guard looked up. "Name?" "Lucien Kade." The guard's expression changed. He picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, then hung up and looked at Lucien. "She's expecting you." "What?" The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like descending into something Seraphina couldn't name. Lucien stood beside her, perfectly still, his face a mask. But Seraphina could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw, the barely controlled rage simmering just beneath the surface. The elevator doors opened. Celeste stood in the center of the penthouse, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. She looked exactly the same. Blonde, beautiful, untouchable. "Hello, Lucien," she said. Lucien stepped out of the elevator. Seraphina followed. "You look surprised," Celeste continued. "Did you really think I wouldn't be ready for you?" Lucien's voice was cold. "You've been hiding my father for 15 years. Yes. You orchestrated my marriage. Yes. You stole from the Syndicate. Yes. And now you're running." Celeste smiled. "No, Lucien, I'm not running. I'm winning." She gestured to the windows. "Look around. I have everything I need. Money, freedom, a life you can't touch." Lucien stepped forward. "You think I can't touch you?" "I know you can't." Celeste pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. A video appeared. It showed Daniel Kade sitting in a chair, bound, a gun pressed to his head. Seraphina's blood went cold. Lucien stopped moving. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I took out insurance," Celeste said. "Your father is in a location only I know. And if you don't walk out of this building right now and never come back, the man holding that gun will pull the trigger." Lucien's expression didn't change, but Seraphina saw his hands start to shake. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Celeste tapped the screen again. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the speakers. Daniel screamed. The video cut off. Lucien lunged. Seraphina grabbed his arm. "Lucien, don't!" He shook her off and crossed the room in 2 strides. But Celeste was ready. She pressed a button on her phone. The lights in the penthouse went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, red, pulsing. And then the door burst open. 3 men entered, armed, moving with military precision. Lucien froze. Celeste's voice cut through the chaos. "I told you, Lucien. You can't touch me. I've been planning this for 15 years. Every move, every contingency. You were never in control. I was. Lucien stared at her. And for the first time in his life, he looked defeated. Celeste stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of here. You're going to go back to Seoul. You're going to sign over controlling interest in Kade Global Holdings to me. And if you do all of that, I'll tell you where your father is. And if I don't, then he dies. And you spend the rest of your life knowing you could have saved him. Seraphina's heart pounded. This was it. The moment where everything collapsed. Where Lucien had to choose between his empire and his father. Between control and family. Between everything he had built and the one thing he had just gotten back. Lucien looked at Celeste for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady. No. Celeste blinked. What? I said no. Lucien, you want the Syndicate? Take it. You want Kade Global? It's yours. But you're not going to use my father as leverage anymore. Celeste's smile faded. You're bluffing. I'm not. You've spent 15 years controlling me through fear, through secrets, through people I love. And I'm done. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where my father is, right now, or I'm going to walk out of here and let you have everything you think you want. And your father dies. Maybe. Or maybe you're bluffing. Maybe that video was staged. Maybe my father's already dead. Maybe he's already free. I don't know, but what I do know is that I'm not going to spend the rest of my life letting you pull my strings. Celeste stared at him. The room went silent. Then she laughed. It was a cold, brittle sound. You really are your father's son, she said. Willing to sacrifice everything for pride. No, Lucien said quietly. I'm willing to sacrifice everything to stop being the man you made me. He turned to Seraphina. We're leaving. Seraphina's breath caught. Lucien, trust me. She looked into his eyes. And she did. They walked toward the elevator. Celeste's voice stopped them. He's in Busan, Warehouse District, Pier 17. Lucien turned slowly. Why are you telling me? Celeste's smile was gone. Because you just proved you're not the man I thought you were, and that makes you dangerous in ways I didn't account for. She paused. Go save your father, Lucien, and then stay out of my way. Lucien didn't respond. He and Seraphina stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and as they descended, Seraphina finally exhaled. Did you mean it? She asked. Mean what? That you'd walk away, let her have everything. Lucien looked at her. Yes. Why? Because I finally understand what you've been trying to tell me for 3 years. Power doesn't matter if you lose everyone who makes you human. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. The elevator doors opened. They walked out into the Singapore morning. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Seraphina believed that maybe, just maybe, Lucien Kade was finally learning how to choose the right things. But as they climbed into the car, Seraphina's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She opened it. Her blood turned to ice. The message contained a single photograph. It showed Lucien's mother. Eleanor. Unconscious, bound. And beneath the image, a message. Your husband chose his father. Now you choose. Come alone to the address below, or Eleanor Kade dies in exactly 2 hours. Seraphina stared at the screen. Her hands started shaking. Lucien looked over. What is it? Seraphina's mind raced. If she told him, he would go after his mother, and Celeste would kill them both. If she didn't tell him, she would have to face this alone. She made the decision in 3 seconds. Nothing, she lied. Just work. She deleted the message. And as Lucien gave the driver directions to the airport, Seraphina sat in silence, staring out the window, knowing that in less than 2 hours, she was going to walk into a trap, alone, and there was no guarantee she would walk back out. The flight back to Seoul felt like drowning in slow motion. Seraphina sat beside Lucien, her phone burning a hole in her pocket. The photograph of Eleanor bound and unconscious seared into her mind like a brand. 2 hours. That's how long she had. The plane wouldn't land for another 90 minutes, which meant she had 30 minutes to get from the airport to whatever trap Celeste had laid. 30 minutes to save Eleanor's life. 30 minutes to decide if she was going to tell Lucien the truth or walk into hell alone. Lucien was on the phone with Adrian, coordinating the team they were sending to Busan to extract Daniel. His voice was calm, controlled. The voice of a man who had just walked away from everything he built and somehow found peace in the rubble. Seraphina watched him, really watched him, and realized that if she told him about Eleanor, he would tear himself apart trying to save both his parents. He would fail, and it would destroy him. So she made the decision that would either save them all or kill her. She said nothing. Just say. They landed at Incheon at 11:47 a.m. Lucian's phone rang the moment they cleared customs. Adrian's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "We've got a problem." Lucian's expression hardened. "What kind of problem?" "Your mother's missing." Seraphina's heart stopped. Lucien froze mid-step. "What?" "She left the estate 3 hours ago, said she was going to meet a friend. She never came back. Her phone's off. Her security detail lost her in Gangnam." Lucian's face went white. "Find her." "We're trying, but Lucien, find her now!" He hung up, turned to Seraphina. "Something's wrong." Seraphina forced her voice to stay steady. "What do you mean?" "My mother doesn't just disappear. She doesn't turn off her phone. She doesn't lose her security." He pulled out his phone again, started dialing. Seraphina's mind raced. If Lucien mobilized the entire syndicate to find Eleanor, Celeste would know, and Eleanor would die. She had to stop him. "Lucien," she said quietly. He looked up. "What if this is exactly what Celeste wants? What if she's trying to pull you in 2 directions at once? Your father in Busan, your mother missing in Seoul. You can't be in both places." Lucien stared at her. "So what do I do?" "You trust your people. Send Adrian to find Eleanor. You go get your father. And we end this." Lucien's jaw clenched, but she was right. He knew she was right. He called Adrian back. "Change of plans. I'm going to Busan. You find my mother. Use everyone. I don't care what it costs." "Understood." Lucien hung up, looked at Seraphina. "Come with me." "No." He blinked. "What?" "I'm staying in Seoul. I can help Adrian search." "Seraphina." "You need someone here, Lucien. Someone who knows Eleanor. Someone who can think like her." It was a lie. A terrible, necessary lie. But Lucien was too fractured to see through it. He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but stay with Adrian. Don't go anywhere alone." "I won't." Another lie. Lucien pulled her into a sudden, desperate embrace. She felt him shaking. "I can't lose them both," he whispered into her hair. Seraphina's eyes burned. "You won't." He pulled back, looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face. Then he turned and walked toward the exit where a car was waiting. Seraphina watched him disappear into the Seoul afternoon. Then she pulled out her phone, opened the deleted message, read the address, and started running. Masik. The address led to an abandoned factory in Seongsudong, industrial, forgotten. The kind of place where screams disappeared into rust and concrete. Seraphina arrived in a taxi at 12:34 p.m. 26 minutes left. She paid the driver with shaking hands and stepped out into the rain that had started falling like the sky itself was grieving. The factory loomed ahead, gray and skeletal, windows shattered like empty eye sockets. Seraphina walked toward it. Her phone buzzed. A new message. "3rd floor, West Wing. Come alone or she dies." Seraphina put her phone on silent, slipped it into her coat pocket, and walked through the broken door into the darkness. Motik. The interior of the factory smelled like decay and old oil. Seraphina's footsteps echoed on cracked concrete as she climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call Lucien, to call Adrian, to call anyone except walk further into this nightmare alone. But Eleanor was here. And Seraphina had spent 3 years learning how to sacrifice herself for the people Lucien loved. Old habits died hard. She reached the 3rd floor. The west wing stretched ahead, dim and cavernous. At the far end, a single light burned. Seraphina walked toward it. Her breath came short and fast. Her hands curled into fists to stop them shaking. She rounded the corner and stopped. Eleanor Kade sat in a chair in the center of the room, bound with zip ties, a strip of tape across her mouth. She was conscious, terrified, and staring at Seraphina with wide, desperate eyes. "Hello, Seraphina?" The voice came from the shadows. Seraphina spun. A woman stepped into the light. Not Celeste. Someone else. Mid-40s, dark-haired, expensively dressed. Her face was unfamiliar, but her eyes held something Seraphina recognized. Calculation. "Who are you?" Seraphina demanded. The woman smiled. "My name is Victoria Zhao. I work for Celeste. Or rather, I did. Until she became a liability." Seraphina's mind raced. "What do you want?" "The same thing everyone wants. Control, money, power. Celeste promised me all three if I helped her take down Lucien Kade. But she got sloppy, emotional, started making mistakes." Victoria circled Eleanor slowly. "So I decided to take what I'm owed and disappear. But I needed insurance, leverage, something to make sure Lucien didn't come after me." She stopped behind Eleanor, pulled out a knife, pressed it to Eleanor's throat. Eleanor's eyes went wide. Seraphina's heart stopped. "Don't," Seraphina whispered. "Then listen very carefully," Victoria said. "You're going to call Lucien, you're going to tell him his mother is safe. You're going to tell him to stand down, and then you're going to transfer $10 million from Kade Global Holdings into an account I provide. I don't have access to those accounts." "Yes, you do. You're still legally married to Lucien Kade. The divorce isn't finalized, which means you have spousal access to emergency funds." Seraphina's blood ran cold. She had forgotten about that, had signed the papers and walked away without thinking about the legal mechanics still tying her to Lucien's empire. "And if I refuse?" Seraphina asked. Victoria pressed the knife harder against Eleanor's throat. A thin line of blood appeared. Eleanor made a muffled sound behind the tape. "Then Eleanor dies," Victoria said simply, "and I disappear with nothing. But at least I'll have the satisfaction of watching Lucien Kade lose everything." Seraphina's hands shook. "You won't get away with this. I already have. Celeste is in Singapore, Lucien is in Busan, and you're here, alone, exactly where I need you." Victoria smiled. "Make the call, Seraphina, or watch his mother bleed out on this floor." Seraphina's mind spun. She had no weapon, no backup. No way to fight a woman holding a knife to Eleanor's throat. All she had was her voice and a phone. She pulled it out slowly. Victoria watched her like a hawk. Seraphina unlocked the screen, opened her contacts, scrolled to Lucien's name. Her finger hovered over the call button. Then she stopped. "No," she said quietly. Victoria's smile faded. What? I said no. "Seraphina, you're going to kill her anyway. The moment I transfer the money, you'll kill us both to cover your tracks. So no, I'm not calling him." Victoria's expression darkened. "Then she dies." "Maybe. But so do you." Victoria laughed. "You're unarmed. You're alone. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" Seraphina took a step forward. "I'm a surgeon. I know exactly where to hit you to make you drop that knife without killing Eleanor in the process. And I know that you're too smart to murder the wife of the most dangerous man in Korea without an exit strategy." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Try me." The standoff stretched, silent, lethal. Then Victoria moved, fast. She yanked Eleanor up by the hair and pressed the knife deeper. "Call him, now." Seraphina didn't move. Victoria's hand shook. And that's when Seraphina saw it. The tremor. The uncertainty. Victoria was scared, which meant she was desperate, which meant she would make mistakes. Seraphina's voice came out cold, clinical. "You cut her throat, and Lucien will hunt you to the ends of the earth. He'll burn every city you hide in. He'll destroy everyone you love. And when he finds you, and he will, he'll make you beg for death long before he gives it to you." Victoria's face went pale. "But if you let her go," Seraphina continued, "I'll give you something better than money. I'll give you a head start. 12 hours. I won't tell Lucien, won't tell Adrian. You'll disappear and he'll never know you existed." "Why would you do that?" "Because I don't care about revenge. I care about getting Eleanor out of here alive." Victoria stared at her. The knife trembled against Eleanor's throat. Then she spoke. You have 10 seconds to transfer the money, or I start cutting. Seraphina's heart hammered. She had played her hand and lost. Victoria started counting. 10. Seraphina opened the banking app on her phone. 9. Her hands shook so hard she could barely type. 8. She logged in. 7. Found the emergency account. 6. Entered the amount. 5. Started the transfer protocol. 4. A notification appeared. Transfer requires secondary authorization. Seraphina's stomach dropped. 3. She didn't have secondary authorization. 2. Only Lucien did. 1. Victoria's hand tightened on the knife. The factory door exploded inward. Adrian Cross walked through the smoke, flanked by 6 armed men. Victoria spun, dragging Eleanor with her. "Don't move!" Adrian's voice cut through the chaos. Victoria pressed the knife against Eleanor's throat hard enough to draw more blood. "I'll kill her!" "No," Adrian said calmly. "You won't." He raised his hand, snapped his fingers. A red laser dot appeared on Victoria's forehead. Sniper. Victoria froze. "Let her go," Adrian said quietly. "And you walk out of here." "You're lying." "I'm not. Lucien Kade wants his mother back. He doesn't care about you. Let Eleanor go, and you disappear. Keep that knife where it is, and you die before you finish the cut." Victoria's hand trembled. Her eyes darted between Adrian and the laser dot on her forehead. Then she made her decision. She shoved Eleanor forward, dropped the knife, and ran. Adrian's men moved to pursue. "Let her go," Adrian said. They stopped. Seraphina lunged forward and caught Eleanor before she hit the ground. She ripped the tape off Eleanor's mouth and cut the zip ties with the knife Victoria had dropped. Eleanor gasped for air, her hands shaking, blood trickling from the shallow cut on her throat. "You're okay," Seraphina whispered. "You're okay." Eleanor grabbed Seraphina's hand, held it tight. "You came," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse. "You came alone." "I couldn't let him lose you?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Adrian knelt beside them. "We need to move. Celeste has people everywhere." Seraphina nodded. They helped Eleanor to her feet. Adrian's men formed a protective circle as they moved toward the exit. Outside, 3 black SUVs waited. They loaded Eleanor into the middle vehicle. Seraphina climbed in beside her. Adrian took the front seat. "Where's Lucien?" Eleanor asked. "Busan," Adrian said. "Extracting his father." Eleanor closed her eyes. "This is my fault." "No," Seraphina said firmly. "This is Celeste's fault, and it ends today." Adrian's phone rang. He answered, listened, then hung up and turned to Seraphina. "Lucien has Daniel. They're heading back to Seoul now." Relief flooded through Seraphina, but it was short-lived. Adrian's expression darkened. "What?" Seraphina asked. "Celeste just landed in Seoul." The air in the vehicle went cold. "Why would she come back?" Eleanor asked. Adrian looked at Seraphina. "Because she knows we have you, and she knows Lucien will come for her now. She's not running anymore. She's making her stand." Seraphina's chest tightened. "Where?" "The Kade estate." Eleanor's face went white. "She's in my home?" Adrian nodded grimly. "She's turned it into a fortress. Armed guards, full security lockdown. She's daring Lucien to come for her." "Then that's exactly what he'll do," Seraphina said. "And he'll die trying," Eleanor replied. "Celeste has been planning this for 15 years. She knows every weakness, every blind spot. She'll be ready." Seraphina looked at Eleanor, then at Adrian. "Then we don't give her time to be ready. We hit her now, before Lucien gets back, before she can prepare." Adrian stared at her. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's better than letting Lucien walk into a trap." Eleanor grabbed Seraphina's hand. "You don't have to do this." Seraphina looked at her. This woman who had called her invisible, who had watched her suffer in silence for 3 years, who had just been held at knife point because of a war Seraphina had never asked to be part of. "Yes," Seraphina said quietly. "I do." She turned to Adrian. "How many men do we have?" Adrian's expression shifted, from doubt to something else, respect. 12. Armed, loyal. "Is that enough?" Against Celeste's forces? No. Then we don't fight them. We outthink them. Seraphina pulled out her phone, opened the estate's security schematics that she had memorized during 3 years of living there. Celeste knows the main entrances, the obvious routes, but she doesn't know what I know. Which is? There's a service tunnel beneath the East Garden. It was built during the Korean War as an escape route. Eleanor showed it to me 2 years ago during a charity event. Eleanor's eyes widened. I'd forgotten about that. Celeste doesn't know it exists, Seraphina continued, which means she won't be guarding it. We go in through the tunnel. We get to her before she realizes we're there, and we end this. Adrian studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. If we're doing this, we're doing it now, before Lucien gets back and stops us. Agreed. Adrian made a call, gave orders. The convoy changed direction, heading toward the Kade estate, toward Celeste, toward the final confrontation that would either save them all or bury them. Seraphina sat back in her seat, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. Eleanor leaned close. Why are you really doing this? She whispered. Seraphina looked at her. Because I love him. And love doesn't stop just because it's inconvenient, or dangerous, or impossible. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. He doesn't deserve you. I know, but maybe that's not the point. The convoy pulled up 2 blocks from the estate. Adrian's men unloaded equipment, body armor, weapons, communications gear. Adrian handed Seraphina a vest. Put this on. She did. It was heavy. Real. Adrian handed her something else. A small handgun. Seraphina stared at it. I don't know how to use this. Point. Pull the trigger. Don't hesitate. Seraphina took the weapon with shaking hands, tucked it into her coat pocket. Adrian looked at his team. Rules are simple. We go in quiet. We extract Celeste. We get out. No unnecessary casualties. Understood? The men nodded. Eleanor grabbed Seraphina's arm. Don't die for him. Seraphina smiled faintly. I'm not dying for him. I'm living for me. There's a difference. Then she turned and followed Adrian into the darkness. The service tunnel was exactly where Seraphina remembered, hidden beneath a stone shrine in the East Garden, accessible through a trapdoor covered in moss and decades of neglect. Adrian's men pried it open. The smell that rose from below was stale, ancient. One by one, they descended. Seraphina went last, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The tunnel was narrow, dark. The walls pressed in like a throat swallowing them whole. They moved in silence, flashlights cutting through the black. Seraphina counted steps to keep from panicking. 200 steps, 300. Then Adrian raised his fist. Everyone stopped. Ahead, a metal door. Adrian tested the handle, locked. One of his men stepped forward with a breaching tool. 30 seconds later, the lock gave. The door swung open. They emerged into the estate's wine cellar. Empty, silent. Adrian signaled. 2 men moved ahead, cleared the stairs, gave the all clear. They climbed, emerged into the main house, and froze. The estate was dark, too dark. Every light was off. Every window shuttered. Adrian raised his hand. Thermal imaging. One of his men pulled out a scanner, swept the area. Then his face went pale. What? Adrian whispered. There's no one here. Seraphina's stomach dropped. That's impossible. I'm telling you, the house is empty. Adrian's jaw clenched. It's a trap. The lights blazed on, blinding. Seraphina threw her hand up to shield her eyes. When her vision cleared, Celeste Laurent stood on the second-floor balcony, looking down at them like a queen surveying her kingdom. Hello, Seraphina, Celeste said. I was wondering when you'd arrive. Adrian's men raised their weapons. Celeste smiled. I wouldn't do that if I were you. She raised her hand. Red laser dots appeared on every member of Adrian's team, dozens of them, from every shadow, every corner, every angle. Celeste had been waiting, and they had walked directly into her trap. Drop your weapons, Celeste said calmly. No one moved. I said drop them. One of Celeste's snipers fired. A warning shot. It hit the floor 3 inches from Adrian's foot. Adrian's men lowered their weapons. Celeste descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking against marble. She stopped 10 feet from Seraphina. You're brave, Celeste said. Stupid, but brave. Seraphina said nothing. Celeste circled her slowly. Did you really think you could outthink me? I've been orchestrating this for 15 years. I know every move before you make it. Then you know Lucien's coming, Seraphina said quietly. Celeste's smile widened. I'm counting on it. This whole thing, Victoria, Eleanor, the factory, all of it was designed to draw you out, to make you feel like a hero. And now you're here, exactly where I need you. Seraphina's blood ran cold. What do you want? I want Lucien to watch you die. I want him to know that loving you was his greatest weakness. And then I want him to give me everything he has left to make it stop. Celeste pulled out a gun, pointed it at Seraphina's head. Adrian moved. 3 shots rang out. Adrian dropped. Blood bloomed across his shoulder. He wasn't dead, but he was down. Seraphina's heart hammered. Celeste pressed the gun against Seraphina's temple. Call him, Celeste said. Call Lucien. Tell him where you are. Tell him what's happening. And tell him that if he wants to see you alive, he needs to come alone. Seraphina's hands shook. No. Celeste cocked the hammer. I said call him. No. Then I'll kill you right now. Do it. Celeste blinked. Seraphina turned to face her, the gun still pressed against her skin. I spent 3 years being controlled by fear. 3 years sacrificing everything for a man who didn't see me. 3 years disappearing. And when I finally found the courage to leave, I chose myself. So if you think I'm going to call him and beg him to save me, if you think I'm going to be the bait that gets him killed, you're wrong. Seraphina's voice didn't waver. Pull the trigger, end it, but you don't get to use me to destroy him. Celeste stared at her. For the first time, genuine surprise crossed her face. Then she lowered the gun. You really do love him? Yes. Even after everything? Yes. Celeste laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. Then you're a fool. Maybe, but I'd rather be a fool who loved than a monster who didn't. The words landed like a slap. Celeste's expression twisted. Then the front door exploded. Lucien Kade walked through the smoke and splintered wood, covered in blood that wasn't his, flanked by 30 armed men. His eyes found Seraphina, then the gun at her head, then Celeste. And something in his expression shifted, from human to something else entirely. Let her go, Lucien said quietly. His voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that came right before a storm tore the world apart. Celeste smiled. Hello, Lucien. Right on time. She pressed the gun back against Seraphina's temple. Take one more step, and I paint the walls with her brain. Lucien stopped, but his eyes never left Seraphina's. You okay? He asked. Seraphina nodded, even though tears were streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I should have told you about Eleanor. I should have... Stop, Lucien said gently. You have nothing to apologize for. Celeste's voice cut through. How touching. But we're done here. You're going to sign over everything, Lucien. The Syndicate, Kade Global. Every offshore account, every asset. All of it, or she dies. Lucien looked at Celeste. Okay. Celeste blinked. What? I said okay. You want it all? Take it. Just let her go. Lucien, Seraphina started. It's fine, Lucien said, his eyes still locked on hers. I told you in Singapore. I'm done letting people I love die for an empire I never wanted in the first place. Celeste stared at him. You're serious? Yes. You'll sign everything over? Yes. And walk away with nothing. Lucien's voice was steady. I'll walk away with her. That's not nothing. The room went silent. Even Celeste seemed thrown. Then she laughed. You really have changed. Yes. Your father would be ashamed. My father is alive. And for the first time in 15 years, I have the chance to know him. So no, I don't think he'd be ashamed. Celeste's smile faded. You think this is over? You think you can just walk away? Yes. You're wrong. Celeste turned the gun away from Seraphina, pointed it at Lucien. You don't get to choose love over power. You don't get redemption. You get the same thing your father got. Betrayal, loss, and a bullet. She pulled the trigger. Seraphina screamed, but the shot never came. Because Celeste's hand was empty. The gun clattered to the floor behind her. She spun. Daniel Kade stood 20 feet away, holding a rifle. He had shot the gun out of her hand. Celeste's face went white. "You," she whispered. Daniel stepped forward, his expression carved from stone. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years you kept me locked away. Told me my family was safer without me. Made me believe I was protecting them by staying hidden. He stopped 5 feet from her. But you weren't protecting them. You were controlling them, using me as leverage to manipulate my son. Celeste backed up. Daniel kept coming. "I should kill you myself." "Then do it," Celeste spat. "Pull the trigger, old man." Daniel stared at her. Then he lowered the rifle. "No, because unlike you, I'm not a monster." He turned to Lucien. "She's yours. Do what you want with her." Lucien looked at Celeste. She was cornered, beaten, destroyed, and for the first time she looked afraid. "Please," Celeste whispered. Lucien's expression didn't change. "You wanted the Empire. You can have it, but you'll run it from a cell. Adrian, call the authorities. Give them everything. Every file, every transaction, every crime." Adrian, bleeding but conscious, pulled out his phone. Celeste's face crumpled. "Lucien, we're done, Celeste. You don't exist to me anymore." He turned away from her, walked to Seraphina, pulled her into his arms, and held her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Behind them, Celeste screamed, cursed, threatened. But Lucien didn't look back. He just held Seraphina and whispered into her hair, "I'm sorry for everything, for not seeing you, for not protecting you, for making you carry all of this alone." Seraphina sobbed into his chest. "I love you," she whispered. "I hate that I do, but I love you." "I know," Lucien said, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth it." Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, Celeste was dragged away, screaming. And in the center of the chaos, Lucien and Seraphina stood together, not as husband and wife, not as strangers, but as two people who had finally learned that the hardest battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with the courage to choose love, even when love chooses you back broken, even when love costs you everything, even when love is the only thing left worth fighting for. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights painted the estate's walls in rhythmic pulses, turning the marble corridors into something that looked like the inside of a dying heart. Lucien held Seraphina for another moment, his hands tangled in her hair, his chest rising and falling against hers, like he was trying to memorize the feeling of her still being alive. Then he pulled back, looked at her, really looked at her. Her face was pale, tear-streaked, beautiful in the way broken things are beautiful when they refuse to shatter completely. "We need to get you checked out," he said quietly. "I'm fine." "You're not." "Lucien, please just let me do this one thing right." Seraphina nodded. Behind them, Adrian was being loaded onto a stretcher by paramedics who had flooded into the estate. The bullet had gone clean through his shoulder. Painful, bloody, but survivable. Eleanor sat on the stairs wrapped in a blanket, giving her statement to a detective who kept glancing at the carnage around them like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Daniel stood near the window, staring out at the Seoul skyline, his silhouette backlit by emergency lights. He looked smaller than Lucien remembered, older, human. Celeste was gone, already in the back of a police van, handcuffed, screaming threats that no one was listening to anymore. It was over. The war that had consumed 15 years, the manipulation that had destroyed families, the lies that had built empires, all of it ended in a single night. But the silence that followed felt heavier than the chaos had. 3 hours later, Seraphina sat in a private hospital room while a doctor checked the bruising on her wrists from zip ties she didn't remember feeling. Lucien stood by the window, watching her with an expression that looked like guilt and grief and something else she couldn't name. The doctor finished his examination. "You're fine," he said. "Bruising will heal in a few days. No permanent damage." "Thank you," Seraphina said quietly. The doctor nodded and left. The door closed behind him. Lucien and Seraphina sat in silence. Then Lucien spoke, his voice rough. "You should have told me." Seraphina looked up. About Eleanor, he continued, when you got the message. You should have told me. I couldn't. Why? Because you would have tried to save everyone. Your father, your mother, me. And you would have died trying. Lucien's jaw tightened. That's not your decision to make.
Yes, it is. You've spent your entire life carrying the weight of everyone else's survival. Someone had to carry yours. That's not love, Seraphina. That's martyrdom. The word hit harder than Seraphina expected. She stood slowly, her hands curling into fists. Don't you dare, she said, her voice shaking. Don't you dare tell me what love is after spending 3 years treating me like I was invisible. Lucien flinched.
I walked into that factory alone because I loved you, Seraphina continued, her voice rising. I lied to your face because I loved you. I put a gun in my pocket, even though I've never fired one in my life because I loved you. So don't stand there and tell me I don't know what love is. Lucien stared at her. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. Not gently, not carefully, desperately, like he was trying to hold together something that had already broken. I'm sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry. For all of it. For not seeing you. For not protecting you. For making you feel like you had to save me alone. Seraphina's hands fisted in his shirt. I don't want your apologies, Lucien. I want you to mean it when you say you've changed. I do. Prove it. Lucien pulled back just enough to look at her. How? By letting me go. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Lucien's expression fractured. What? The divorce papers are still on your desk, Seraphina said quietly. You signed them. I signed them. All that's left is filing them. So if you really love me, if you really understand what I need, then you'll let me go. You'll let me rebuild myself without you. And if we're supposed to find our way back to each other, we will. But not like this. Not broken. Not desperate. Not held together by trauma and guilt. Lucien's hands shook where they held her. I don't want to lose you. I know, but you already did, 3 years ago, when you stopped seeing me, and the only way to get me back is to let me choose you again. Freely. Without obligation, without fear. Tears filled Lucien's eyes. For the first time in 15 years, he cried. Not violently, not dramatically, just quiet tears that ran down his face while he held the woman he had destroyed and finally understood what it meant to love someone enough to let them leave. Okay, he whispered. Seraphina's breath hitched. Okay? I'll let you go. I'll file the papers. I'll give you space, time, whatever you need. He cupped her face in his hands. But I need you to know something first. What? I will wait, however long it takes, however much work I need to do on myself. I will wait. Because you're not the woman I needed, Seraphina. You're the woman I want. And I was too broken to see the difference. Seraphina closed her eyes. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'm not. She opened her eyes, looked at him, and for the first time she believed him. 1 week later, the divorce papers were filed. Lucien didn't contest, didn't delay, didn't make it difficult. He signed every document with the same steady hand he had used to sign contracts that built empires. And when it was done, Seraphina was legally free. She moved into her small apartment permanently, furnished it slowly, carefully, with things that belonged to her and no one else. Lucien moved out of the penthouse. Too many ghosts. Too many memories of a woman who used to make his coffee and restock his medication and quietly hold his life together while he ignored hers. He bought a smaller place across the city, started therapy, actually showed up, actually talked, actually did the work of becoming someone who could love without destroying. Daniel Kade moved back to Seoul, not to the estate. Eleanor wouldn't allow that, but to a small house in the hills where he spent his days learning how to be a father to a son who had spent 15 years believing he was dead. It was awkward, painful. Neither of them knew how to talk to each other without the weight of betrayal sitting between them like a third person in the room. But they tried, and trying was more than they had ever done before. Eleanor filed for divorce. 40 years of marriage ended with the same cold efficiency that had defined it. She didn't cry, didn't grieve, just signed the papers and moved forward. Because Eleanor Kade had spent her entire life surviving, and survival didn't leave room for sentimentality. Adrian recovered. The bullet wound healed, the scar remained. He went back to work running the Syndicate operations Lucien no longer had the stomach for. But something had changed. The violence felt emptier. The power felt meaningless. And for the first time in his 42 years, Adrian started wondering if there was a life beyond the one he had built in the shadows. Celeste Laurent was sentenced to 20 years. Fraud, embezzlement, kidnapping, conspiracy. The list went on. She didn't appeal, didn't fight, just sat in her cell and stared at the walls, knowing that the empire she had spent 15 years trying to steal had crumbled the moment Lucien chose love over control. 3 months passed. Seraphina accepted the fellowship at Imperial College in London. She packed her life into 2 suitcases and a carry-on, left Seoul on a rainy Tuesday morning. Didn't tell anyone she was leaving, except one person. Lucien showed up at the airport. He didn't try to stop her, didn't beg her to stay. Just stood there in a gray coat with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had finally learned what it meant to let go. "You came," Seraphina said. "I told you I'd wait. That doesn't mean I can't say goodbye." They stood in the middle of the departures terminal, surrounded by strangers rushing toward gates and futures and destinations they had chosen for themselves. "I don't know if I'm coming back," Seraphina said quietly. "I know. I don't know if we'll ever work. I know. I don't know if I can forgive you for the 3 years I lost. I know." Seraphina's throat tightened. "Then why are you here?" Lucien stepped closer, not touching, just close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he was carrying, the man he was trying to become. "Because you deserve to know that someone sees you leaving, that someone notices, that you're not disappearing into the world the way you disappeared in our marriage." Seraphina's eyes burned. "Lucien." "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to wait for me. I'm just asking you to know that I see you. Finally, completely. And I'm sorry it took losing you to learn how." A tear slipped down Seraphina's cheek. Lucien reached up slowly, wiped it away with his thumb. Then he stepped back. "Go," he said quietly. "Build the life you deserve. And if you ever decide you want me in it, I'll be here. But if you don't, I'll understand that too." Seraphina stared at him. Then she did something she had never done in their entire marriage. She kissed him. Not desperately, not urgently, just softly, gently. Like a goodbye that didn't close the door completely but didn't leave it wide open either. When she pulled back, Lucien's eyes were closed. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For finally letting me go." Then she turned and walked toward her gate without looking back. Lucien stood in the terminal long after she disappeared, watching the space where she had been, memorizing the feeling of loving someone enough to watch them leave. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel empty. He felt lighter, because loving Seraphina had never been the problem. The problem had been loving her the wrong way, and now he finally understood the difference. 6 months later, Seraphina stood in a London operating theater, scrubbed in, focused, saving a life that had nothing to do with Lucien Kade or Seoul or the empire she had walked away from. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear, her heart was her own again. After surgery, she walked to a small cafe near the hospital and ordered coffee. Black. No sugar, just the way she liked it. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed a small garden, neat rows of vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, herbs. Beneath the photo, a caption. "I'm learning to grow things instead of destroying them. Thought you'd want to know." Seraphina stared at the message. Then she smiled. Not because she was going back, not because she had forgiven everything, but because for the first time she believed that maybe, just maybe, Lucien Kade was finally becoming someone worth knowing. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she saved the photo, finished her coffee, and walked out into the London afternoon, surrounded by a life that belonged entirely to her. In Seoul, Lucien stood in his garden, dirt under his fingernails, sweat on his brow, staring at the small tomato plant that had finally started to grow. It wasn't much, just a single plant. but it was alive. And he had kept it alive. Without help, without shortcuts, without controlling every variable, just patience, water, sunlight, and time. Daniel walked out onto the patio carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Lucien. They stood in silence, staring at the garden. "Your mother called," Daniel said finally. "What did she want?" "To tell me she's moving to Jeju, starting over." Lucien nodded slowly. "Good for her. She asked about you. What did you tell her?" "That you're learning how to be human." Lucien smiled faintly. "That's generous." "It's true." They drank their tea in comfortable silence. Then Daniel spoke again. "Do you think she'll come back?" He didn't have to say who. Lucien knew. "I don't know." "Do you want her to?" "Yes, but not until I'm someone she'd want to come back to." Daniel studied his son. Then he nodded. "That's the first smart thing I've heard you say in 15 years. Lucien laughed. It was a rough, unused sound, but it was real. And for the first time since Seraphina left, Lucien felt something other than grief. He felt hope. One year later, Seraphina received a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual handwritten letter delivered to her London address in an envelope that smelled faintly like soil and something green. She opened it carefully. Inside, Lucien's handwriting, neat, controlled, but with a warmth she had never seen before. "Seraphina, I won't waste your time with apologies. You've heard enough of those. Instead, I'll tell you what I've learned. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean owning them. It means seeing them, fully, constantly, without conditions. I learned that power is empty if you have no one to share it with. I learned that my father is flawed and human and trying, and that's enough. I learned that my mother is stronger than I ever gave her credit for. I learned that gardens require patience, that tomatoes grow slowly, that some things can't be rushed no matter how much you want them. I learned that I was never afraid of love. I was afraid of vulnerability, and vulnerability requires trust, and I never trusted anyone, not even myself. But I'm learning. I'm not the man I was when you left. I don't know if I'm the man you deserve yet, but I'm trying, every day, in small, unglamorous ways that no one sees except me. I don't know if you'll ever come back. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I don't even know if you still think about me. But I needed you to know that I think about you, every day. Not with regret, not with desperation, just with gratitude, because you taught me how to see. And now that I can, I finally understand what I lost. If you ever find yourself in Seoul again, there's a small garden behind my house. The tomatoes are finally growing. I'd like to show you. But if you don't come, I'll understand. Either way, thank you. For everything. For loving me when I didn't deserve it. For leaving me when I needed it. For teaching me that the hardest kind of love is the kind that sets people free. Lucien Seraphina read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer beside 17 other letters he had sent over the past year. Letters she had never responded to. Letters that chronicled a man slowly learning how to become someone worth loving. She walked to her window, stared out at the London skyline, and made a decision. Vamos! Ease. 2 weeks later, Seraphina landed in Seoul. She didn't tell Lucien she was coming, didn't call ahead, didn't send a message, just showed up. The garden was exactly where he said it would be. Small, neat, thriving. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines. Peppers glowed red and green in the afternoon sun. Herbs filled the air with scent. And in the center of it all, Lucien knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds with hands that were calloused and earth-stained. Seraphina stood at the edge of the garden, watching him. He didn't notice her at first. Too focused, too present in the work. Then he looked up. Froze. Stared at her like she was something he had imagined so many times he couldn't quite believe she was real. "Hi," Seraphina said quietly. Lucien stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. "Hi." They stood 10 feet apart, neither moving, neither speaking, just looking at each other like 2 people meeting for the first time. "The tomatoes look good," Seraphina said. "They're finally producing. How long did it take?" "Longer than I expected, but worth it."
Seraphina smiled faintly. I got your letters. I know, you never responded. I wasn't ready. And now? I don't know. Lucien nodded slowly. That's fair. He gestured to the garden. Do you want to see it? Yes. Seraphina walked through the rows of plants, touching leaves, smelling herbs, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin.
Lucien walked beside her, not touching, not crowding, just present. I've been in therapy, he said quietly, twice a week for the past year, learning how to identify emotions instead of burying them, learning how to communicate instead of control, learning how to be alone without feeling empty. Seraphina listened. I sold controlling interest in Kade Global, he continued, stepped down from the Syndicate. I still have money, resources, but I'm not running an empire anymore. I'm just trying to figure out who I am without one. And? Seraphina asked. Who are you? Lucien stopped walking, looked at her. I don't know yet, but I'm learning. And I think that's the point. Seraphina's chest tightened. Why did you really write those letters, Lucien? What did you want from me? Nothing. Liar. Lucien smiled faintly. Okay. I wanted you to know I was trying. I wanted you to see that I was changing. I wanted you to believe that maybe, someday, I could be someone you'd choose. And if I never chose you again, then I'd still keep trying, not for you, for me, because I finally understand that becoming a better person isn't about winning someone back. It's about becoming someone you can live with. Seraphina stared at him. Then she stepped closer. I'm not staying, she said quietly. Lucien's expression didn't change. I know. I have a life in London, work I love, a future I'm building. I know. I don't know if we'll ever work, Lucien. I don't know if what we had can be fixed. I know. Then why do you look so calm? Lucien reached out slowly, took her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, real. Because you came back. Not to stay, not to fix us, but because you wanted to see if I meant what I said, and that's more than I deserve. Seraphina's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared. Of what? That I'll fall in love with you again, and you'll break my heart the same way. Lucien's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I can't promise I won't make mistakes. I can't promise I'll always get it right, but I can promise that I'll never stop seeing you, that I'll never take you for granted again, that I'll spend every day proving you matter. That's a big promise. I know, but I've had a year to practice keeping small ones, and I'm ready for bigger. Seraphina looked down at their joined hands, then back up at him. I need time. I know. I need space. I know. I need you to understand that this doesn't fix everything. I know. Then what do you need, Lucien? His answer came without hesitation. Just a chance. Not to be your husband. Not to own you. Just a chance to be someone you'd want in your life, however that looks, whatever that means. Seraphina's breath caught, and for the first time in over a year, she let herself feel it. The love she had tried to bury, the hope she had tried to kill. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, broken things could be rebuilt if both people were willing to do the work. Okay, she whispered. Lucien's eyes widened. Okay? Okay, you get a chance, but we start over. No marriage, no obligations, just two people getting to know each other without the weight of everything that came before. I can do that. And if it doesn't work, if I decide I can't trust you again, you let me go, completely. No letters, no messages, no showing up in London. Deal. Seraphina stepped back, released his hand. I'm leaving tomorrow, back to London, but I'll be in Seoul again in 3 months for a medical conference. I'll be here. Don't make plans around me. I won't. But if you want to see the garden again, the door's open. Seraphina smiled, a real smile. The first one Lucien had seen in over a year. Okay. Then she turned and walked out of the garden. This time Lucien didn't watch her leave. He went back to his tomatoes, back to the work, back to the slow, unglamorous process of becoming someone worth waiting for. 3 months later, Seraphina returned to Seoul for the medical conference. On her second night in the city, she texted Lucien. Is the garden still there? His response came 30 seconds later. Always. She showed up that evening. The tomatoes were ripe. He had made dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta with fresh tomatoes and herbs from the garden. They ate on the patio, surrounded by plants and fading sunlight, and the kind of comfortable silence that only comes when two people stop performing for each other. "This is good," Seraphina said. "Thank you. I'm still learning to cook. It's harder than it looks." "Most things worth doing are." They finished dinner. Lucien didn't ask her to stay, didn't push, didn't assume, just walked her to the gate and said goodnight. But before she left, Seraphina turned back. "Same time tomorrow?" Lucien's face lit up, not dramatically, just a quiet kind of joy that reached his eyes. "Yes." 6 months later, Seraphina transferred back to Seoul General. Not for Lucien, for herself, because London had been healing. But Seoul was home, and she was finally ready to reclaim it. Lucien didn't move in with her, didn't propose, didn't rush. They built something new, slowly, carefully, like growing tomatoes. They had dinner twice a week, talked every day, learned each other again without the weight of a failed marriage pressing down on them. And somewhere in the slow accumulation of ordinary moments, cooking together, arguing about movies, sitting in the garden while Lucien pulled weeds and Seraphina read medical journals, they fell in love. Not the desperate, consuming love that had destroyed them before, but something quieter, steadier, built on seeing each other fully and choosing each other anyway. Yorkshire Lanets. 2 years after Seraphina walked out of the penthouse, she walked back into Lucien's life. Not as his wife, not as his solution, but as his partner. They didn't remarry. Not right away. Maybe not ever. Because the piece of paper didn't matter anymore. What mattered was showing up, every day, in small, unglamorous ways, choosing each other, over and over, until choosing became as natural as breathing. Daniel and Eleanor never reconciled, but they learned to coexist, to co-parent their adult son. To build separate lives that occasionally intersected at family dinners that were awkward and imperfect, and somehow enough. Adrian left the Syndicate, opened a small security consulting firm, found someone who saw him as more than the shadow he had spent 42 years hiding in, and occasionally, on warm Seoul evenings, the whole fractured, rebuilt family would gather in Lucien's garden. Daniel would tell stories about the 15 years he lost. Eleanor would correct his memory with surgical precision. Adrian would laugh. Seraphina would make her mother's Ghanaian pepper sauce. And Lucien would stand in the center of it all, covered in dirt, surrounded by people he had almost lost, finally understanding what it meant to build something that lasted. Not through control, not through power, but through the quiet, relentless work of showing up, of seeing, of choosing love even when love chose you back broken. But 5 years after the divorce papers were signed, Seraphina stood in the same garden, older now, steadier, with hands that had saved hundreds of lives and a heart that had finally learned how to save her own. Lucien knelt beside her, planting new seeds. Tomatoes. Always tomatoes. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Giving me a second chance." Seraphina looked at him, at the gray threading through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that came from smiling instead of frowning, at the man who had spent 5 years proving that people could change if they wanted it badly enough. "No," she said, "but I don't regret leaving either, because leaving was what saved me, and coming back was my choice, not yours, mine." Lucien nodded slowly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that the best kind of love is the kind that lets you leave, and the best kind of person is the one who spends their life becoming someone worth coming back to." Seraphina smiled, leaned over, kissed him softly, then went back to planting seeds beside him, surrounded by a garden they had built together from soil and patience and the stubborn belief that broken things could grow into something beautiful if given enough time. And in the fading Seoul sunlight, surrounded by tomatoes and herbs and the quiet hum of a life rebuilt from ashes, Seraphina finally understood the truth she had been searching for all along. Love didn't save you. You saved yourself. But love, real love, the kind built on seeing and choosing and showing up, that could make the saving worth it. That could turn survival into something that looked like joy. That could take two broken people and build them into something whole, not perfect, never perfect, but real and human. And finally, devastatingly, enough.